Welcome back to our Leaders Who Care series. I'm super happy to have you on.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So this is pretty international right now, which is what I love especially. So with that, a great place to start. If you can briefly introduce yourself, but mostly about where you're from originally, where you are now, family stuff, what's your favorite color, maybe something you've never told anybody and you want to reveal it now to the world. We go with that too. We'll get into the business stuff after.
Yeah, that sounds great. Really international conversation. I'm speaking to you from Utrecht, which is third largest city in the Netherlands. And I've been living here with my family for about 4 years now, and in Europe more broadly for about 10 years. But I'm originally from California. So we've been kind of on this wild ride and enjoying staying on this ride. I have an American wife who I met working together at an organization in Switzerland, a 5-year-old son born in the UK, and a 2-year-old daughter born here. So we're definitely keeping up that international flavor in our house. Something that I haven't shared with anybody. I don't know whether I've got something amazing to share in this setting, but I'll say here's kind of a random one for you that I have a black belt in Taekwondo.
Whoa.
I don't think comes up very often, and don't ask me to show you because I'm not flexible enough to demonstrate anything anymore.
Man, I'm glad I didn't get you pissed off when we were in Aspen together. Jeez.
I'm also glad it wouldn't have been great for me, I suspect.
No, okay. So that's we talk about mental health a lot these days. That actually is one way of helping. Have good ones.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I got my black belt when I was 15, 16 years old. And it's right at that time where you need a little bit of structure in your life to, help you keep calm and focused. And it was great for me for that. And obviously all the physical aspects as well. So I do still enjoy dreaming about it and, wish that I was a ninja in my day-to-day life, but yeah, mostly in my past.
I wonder what costume you wore for Halloween. Jeez.
Well, yeah, in every occasion I would bring out the belt. So didn't always match the outfit, but I would wear it anyway.
And do your kids know?
They know, yeah. I've tried to get my 5-year-old into it, and he loves the idea, but he's much more of a pacifist, I think. So
Yeah, my kids did when they were younger. They did karate and I guess I don't know if it was jujitsu when they were younger, and it actually helped their everything. They played hockey and everything, but like discipline wise and structure wise, you're right. It's fantastic. So speaking of kids, so when you were a kid, what did you do? What turned you on? Were you the first to try stuff? Did you play music? Did you play sports? What was Matt like as a kid?
yeah, not so much music, although I've always loved music and loved listening to music. But definitely all sports. I was playing, in addition to Taekwondo, football and basketball and tennis and pretty much anything I could get involved in. Fencing, I did all of it and loved it. But I would actually say that most of what I did was just kind of being creative and dreaming in a lot of ways. My family used to just send me into the backyard and I would go out there and we would call it imagining stories, where I would just pretend that I was a ninja and, jump and kick and be out there by myself in my own head. And yeah, I think in some ways I probably continued on with that tradition, but I was pretty fun loving kid and kind of a combination of teacher's pet and class clown at the same time. And yeah, mostly just dreaming about the future, but didn't know what that meant.
But wasn't it a great time though? Because imagination, when NASA stopped the space stopped from without, we lost some imagination then. That because it was such a big thing to think about. And I had a conversation with somebody recently who had founded a company called Humans to Venus and a foundation, and it's about the whole journey of going there and everything that can happen in between. But we're saying, yeah, as a kid, didn't you ever sit there and think you get into a rocket ship, and if you could have infinite gas or fuel and just keep going, how far could you go? Type of thing.
Yeah.
It would drive your brain crazy because there's no answer. But we have a colleague that actually coaches leaders on imagination and creativity to be better leaders and stuff. So we need more of that imagination. Tell us a little bit about your journey. You started with philosophy at UCLA and then law at the University of San Francisco. What intrigued you to go down that path?
So pretty much for as long as I can remember, I was told that I was going to be a lawyer.
Oh, good.
And yeah, and I think that was mostly because I just loved to argue. And, I suppose I was reasonably good at it for being a 5-year-old. Uh, and so in my head, I just always had that as the path. And I think what I imagined law is like courtroom drama sort of stuff, being up there and arguing your case and just getting everybody passionate and inspired and winning, an argument. And so I just kind of went through my entire educational career knowing that that was going to be the outcome and not having a particularly clear idea of how to get there or even what it would mean when I did. But I knew that that's where I was going. And so when I was choosing a major in college, it was not so stressful in the sense that I didn't think that it mattered whether I was in art or engineering or philosophy or anything in terms of going into law school. So I just chose something that sounded interesting at the time. And for me, philosophy felt like a natural fit because I'm a very conceptual thinker. Like I'm not all that interested in specific facts or numbers. I'm definitely not wired to be a scientist or an engineer, but I like big ideas, and that felt like a natural fit in philosophy. In full transparency, I probably ended up making up most of my philosophies, and the papers that I would write were more my interpretation of this stuff rather than the real kind of core of philosophy and philosophers. But I managed to get by with it, and then went to law school in San Francisco. I actually really loved the experience of learning about law, and I've always been a very logic-driven person. So I appreciated that aspect of the law, and it was a great experience. But I actually really quickly found in practicing law in the summers that I couldn't stand it, and it was just way too procedural for me. I was, as I said, much more interested in that kind of combination of being creative and also getting up on a stage and trying to inspire people, and that actually wasn't law for me. So I started to look pretty quickly for ways of leveraging that experience in the knowledge base in other fields. I did take the bar and had that option if I wished to, but I was lucky enough to not have to actually follow through on it.
Yeah, I could relate because I got my CPA. I was with Deloitte, and I had a partner that we'll talk about influencers later that really influenced me by saying, you're really good at this. I know you're really good at it, but I can see you really don't like it. And so he started getting me involved in client relations and marketing and recruiting and all sorts of other stuff. And so totally got it in that respect. We founded Fifth Element on the basis that leaders, businesses, organizations can do way, way better economically and every other when they're doing good. So I can see there's certainly a thread. You've been clearly a believer in that from the beginning, even with what you're talking about school-wise, with an interesting career that somehow started at the U.S. Mint. So can you tell me a little bit of that happened first before we get into the rest of it?
Well, it's a kind of natural progression from me realizing that I didn't want to be a lawyer and having the kind of weight of a tremendous law school debt and having to figure out how to pay that.
I was wondering if there were samples at the Mint, and that's why you went there.
Well, yeah. So I mean, that certainly helped out a bit. So I was very fortunate in finding myself in a fellowship program called the Presidential Management Fellowship, which took postgraduate students from all sorts of different fields and put them into government leadership kind of training, basically. So you would rotate around to different government agencies and get experience with the idea of them becoming a leader yourself. And as part of the fellowship, it's basically just exposure to all of these agencies, and then you have to actually convince one to hire you and take you on as a 2-year fellow. And so I was meeting with all kinds of different folks, and one of the people that I met with was a representative of the U.S. Mint, and the position that they were looking to hire for was somebody to work in a very small team leading their advertising and marketing for their collectible coins. I didn't have any background or particular interest in the coins themselves, but when I was at UCLA, I actually ran the advertising team for a couple of years. And so I had that passion for the kind of creative aspects of advertising. And I also had a little bit of an understanding about how to market products, just enough that I think I was able to convince the US Mint that I could actually do that job. So it was my way to formally enter into government. And I had a great experience. I worked there for a year. And actually, it was one of the most fortuitous things that's ever happened in my life, because I ended up getting connected to USAID, which began my development journey, because the former director of the US Mint became the USAID administrator that I then subsequently worked for. So I don't know that I would have ever been able to start this journey if I hadn't begun at the Mint.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and you gave me a good segue there, because I was going to say, talk about your interest in your entry into your next career moves, where you're leading on programs, you have a passion for it. Common thread seems to be around children and nutrition along the way, but relationships are invaluable, and you just told us that it was a relationship from unexpectedly got you to that with USAID, right?
Yeah, I think that relationships and building coalitions has been the defining characteristic in my career. I did that at USAID, working with other bilateral donors on every issue in global health and development and climate and conflict, and every possible way that you could work as public donors together. I was involved in that in some capacity, which was an incredible crash course in all things development. And I had zero background in any of it. So I was just kind of finding my way through. But what I had a kind of a natural affinity for, and I guess some talent in, was being able to work across really diverse stakeholder groups and find common cause and try to stitch things together. And I've done that in every different sector since then. I've done quite a lot in nutrition and a lot working with women and girls and in agriculture and climate, but it's always been through that lens of trying to work in diverse coalitions. And yeah, I get a lot of energy from that. And it's the most powerful thing when you can be doing that for, transformative social impact. So I feel very fortunate.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's interesting. I always find it interesting based on what we do and what I do around talent and attracting and keeping talent and whatever. You look at the discipline from the what was it? Not Taekwondo.
Yeah,
Taekwondo. You look at the law, which you didn't really like, but how they all contribute to a foundation of how to do things to where you are now is kind of fascinating. We kind of know, but we don't know in some ways when we're going through it. So it's funny when you look back, it's funny to see how they really can make a difference. And maybe the differentiator for people to have been interested in giving you the shot at getting certain things that you got to do, that you became great at. The fifth industrial revolution, which is partly why we're named Fifth Element, is about humanity. At least that's what everybody seems to be saying. I'm not sure who defines it 100%, but that's it. And the fourth is really about technology and AI and everything that goes with that. Can you chat a little bit about the uniqueness of Stronger Foundations, how and why it came about, and the vision, mission for impact?
Yeah, absolutely. So Stronger Foundations for Nutrition is the global philanthropic community for malnutrition. And we are working in every aspect of malnutrition in every place around the world where the burden is felt, which is pretty much the entirety of the planet. So we're working in health systems, in humanitarian contexts, in food systems, on undernutrition and overnutrition and chronic disease and climate, and all of that is within the scope of our work. And we have now almost 30 global funders that are part of our network and constantly growing as a community. It's a very diverse group that the kind of origins first formed back in 2017 on the margins of a major nutrition pledging moment. But really the kind of center of gravity for the network and the public face of it is only about 2 years old. And that aligns with my time as the founding executive director of this network. So what we're trying to do is help a very diverse group, diverse in its interests and in its kind of geographic scope, but also in the ways in which it gives and the scale of giving, and try to help it work in a more coherent way together. Not necessarily always through pooled funding, but to have a greater shared understanding of the evidence base and what works, where further investment is needed, and then try to push to ultimately grow this sector and work in more impactful ways.
Yeah, I find
that's what I do.
No, I find to me it's fantastic. You know, I used to be, the way I came to the States, it was the executive director of JC's International, which is also a global nonprofit leadership development. And you know, the joke's always about, you know, everybody wants to collaborate, but all lead type of thing. And there's great collaboration. Yet there's so much more impact that can be made if you do collaborate, and economies of scale, ideas, you name it, all the obvious stuff. You know, the challenge, you know, the challenges and opportunities through some specific experiences you've had, if you can share some of those and how you've engaged partners and stakeholders, and which they see better business or better impact results because of it. They see their ability to attract not only talent for themselves, but maybe for companies that are supporting, family offices that are supporting, volunteers that are coming, and not to make the question too long, but also seeing the impact on families and into the community as well. Can you share some of those experiences you've had?
I mean, it's just a laundry list, because to be honest, every day is the challenge of trying to make a very diverse coalition work better together. Mm-hmm. And nutrition is in some ways kind of uniquely fragmented, I would say, because it is such a cross-cutting issue. It's health and it's food, and it is survival and it's development. Sure. You know, and within all of that breadth, there are just so many different ways that you can also solve for the problem. A multitude of very strongly evidenced interventions that can improve child survival outcomes, none of which have enough funding. And when you go into looking at food and access to water and sanitation, all of which matter dearly, again, not nearly enough money, and all of them really critical to achieving the kinds of outcomes that we all want to see for these communities. So it can be really challenging to say to anyone who has their specific priorities in this space that you should stop doing that and instead do this, because it really all matters. And for most of it, it would be highly impactful to continue doing that work. So what we're trying to do is, at least where there are certain areas where the evidence is particularly strong and where the case for scale up is especially powerful, we want to make sure that those are raised to the very top of this longer list of things that matter, especially so that when newer philanthropists are coming to the table and thinking about every incremental dollar and the absolute best use of those funds, that we have a good answer for them. Mm-hmm. So we're increasingly crystallizing that. And then I also think a lot of this is about just finding opportunities where funders can work in more of an aligned way in a context. So I'm looking more at a systems level, and in recognition of the fact that we need to both prevent child wasting and also treat the kids that are wasted. And we need to improve the overall quality of the food that's being provided to not only mothers and children, but all population groups. So all of that needs to happen, and how can we do it in a way that feels a little bit more coherent? So it's a little bit less of let's all focus our efforts on one thing, which is almost impossible for this group, and more about how can we collectively march toward this transformational change that we all want to see happen.
Yeah, and I think that's the big challenge, the transformational change. I was talking to somebody the other day that I don't remember the number, but he said, if you put 200 or $2 trillion towards them, it'll be solved. if it was that easy, it'd be fantastic, I guess. But because there's so many parts, we're super excited, obviously, about our relationship with you, Fifth Element relationship with Stronger Foundations, and what happened with the our UTFs and raising money for our UTFs with UNICEF and that partnership. What I find interesting is, I don't know if you've ever seen Mr. Holland's Opus, the movie. And he didn't realize how many people he impacted. And there's so many kids that you'll maybe see the ones that are saved, for lack of a better word, and become Einstein or become whatever. But there's so many others that you don't see, that you just got to cherish just cherish the fact that that happened, and getting that message across to people that you have data, you have information, but there's a lot more than just the data shows the impact you're making, right?
Right. Absolutely. And I think that's one of the great challenges in the work that we do, and something that divides funders, but also policymakers and volunteers, everyone who's working in these causes, is that some are really motivated almost exclusively in what we would call like a direct service delivery. So knowing exactly for every dollar or hour that you invest, who you're directly benefiting, what that result is for that individual, and it's a kind of a counting stat. And then there are others who think almost exclusively through the lens of systems change. And there, it's impossible to directly track the impact of your single intervention. And in fact, that's kind of counter to the approach that you're trying to support, which is moving a very complex ecosystem forward to the benefit of all forever. And what we're trying to figure out here, and it's an incredibly challenging dance, is how can you kind of do both at the same time? So how can the investments that you're making to move individual people or communities forward in ways that are really clear and easy to measure, relatively easy to measure, and at the same time have a confidence that you're contributing to that changing system? And it's hard enough to even describe conceptually, let alone to actually do it in practice. But I think that's increasingly what we should all be aiming for, because we don't have the luxury of waiting for decades for these systems to change. We have, 1 million plus kids dying from wasting, for example. And yet we also can't continue to live in this world forever where we're year after year trying to save 1 million kids' lives. So it has to be all of the above. And we can't settle for the fact that it can't be.
Yeah, it's you couldn't say it better myself. It's I guess it's almost like planting a tree. You may not see the full tree develop, etc., but it is there. And I think the emotion plays a big part with children. People love to be able to help children in schools and whatnot. Do you find the organizations that are in the stronger foundations, they have it's because it's children that they're so emotionally connected to it, and do they bring other parties in as well to support?
I definitely think it's a powerful case whenever you're talking about children, and most who are actively investing in nutrition over the years have been motivated by that. What's really interesting in the nutrition sector is that the argument historically has been one of child development, and really thinking about how 15, 20 years from now, the kids that we're intervening with today will be stronger, they'll grow taller, their brains will develop more fully, and what that will mean in terms of their own educational ability, what that means in terms of the economic impact on countries. And that's a very compelling logic for most of the community that engages at the moment. What we find, though, is that there's quite a barrier for many new funders to come in who are more focused on the shorter term. And that's even true for funders, for example, in the education community, who are also thinking about the future outcomes, but they're thinking about it for a current cohort, right? It's the kids in school today rather than the kids who are going to be in school in a decade. So what I've actually found to be a more powerful frame in many ways, and you were alluding to this with our UTF, ready to use therapeutic foods, is that malnutrition is the number one cause of child death today, right? So it's not only that we are sapping the collective potential of the next generation, which is true, but we're also losing 1 million kids to wasting. And when you look at the total burden of undernutrition, it's 3 million kids, which is nearly half of all child death. So that's something that we just have to confront immediately, and then also enjoy all the positive benefits that come from improving those longer term development outcomes. So I think even when you're talking kids, it's really like having to figure out how do we make these issues feel real and immediate.
Yeah, and I think one thing with I mean, every generation wants to make a difference and do well in some way or another type of thing. But what I've seen, I'm sure you have too, is this younger generation is feeling an urgency that I don't think any previous generation has felt, to the point of children starving, to the point of the climate, to the point of we don't have time anymore. And I think they've got it. I think they realize we got to do now and we got to do future. And we're seeing so many entrepreneurs and innovators and young people coming up with ideas that are mind blowing, that are really exciting to see, that I think will support what you're doing in changing the system. I'm assuming you've seen that too.
Absolutely have seen it, and I'm inspired by it as well. And in some ways, this kind of connects back to my early sense of childhood, dream and belief that anything is possible. And I think what this next generation brings is not only that urgency, but that sense of why can't this happen? If we just commit ourselves to it, and if we get enough of the right people behind it, then we can create this change. And I think that we need to reject this kind of current inertia in the system that says we've tried too many times and we failed too many times, so let's give up on that hope and start to just deal with the reality of it. No, I think we have to say we'll try again. We'll have a better answer. We'll get new people together, more diverse stakeholders together, and we'll make this happen. So I love the energy of youth in that.
Yeah, well, you gave me a good segue to the second to last question about, we were launched on International Women's Day 5 years ago at the UN, and we do everything with a leaning towards diversity. Every executive search, every project is diversity, not just because, but because they bring different ideas, different expertise, different experiences, different perspectives, everything. Share with us a little bit about what you appreciate about diversity working globally, the sameness and the diversity of ideas.
I think it's everything. And in our network, we are incredibly diverse geographically. We have the largest funders working in Africa and in India and in Nepal, as well as across Europe and in the US, and increasingly trying to make sure that we have the greatest global footprint imaginable, because the burden is everywhere, but also because the energy and the ideas that come from that direct connection to communities is just so invaluable. But then even beyond that geographic diversity, as I was describing earlier, the diversity in terms of how to solve these problems, and the difference between a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the way that they approach these problems with this very powerful strategic lens and a heavy investment in innovation is incredibly different from how the Rotary International, with their 1.5 million clubs around the world, hyper local, and how they're solving this problem. And we need all of it. And we also need to find ways of helping these groups to connect in more meaningful ways and to partner. So I think that is the big unlock, is trying to have all that diversity in ways that somehow is also greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, I've been fortunate. I've interviewed a lot of up and coming leaders who care, not to be cute, but up and coming leaders who care. And it's inspiring for me to just hear some of their stuff and like where their thinking's coming from. And I had a Deloitte partner years ago when I first started, told me, Mark, he said, brilliance is simple. And I was trying to figure out what he meant. Doesn't mean there's not complications, but the solution is there. And that's what's brilliant about it, that it is there, and we just got to do it. In LA, we say that we got to leave them wanting more so we can do a sequel. That's an LA talk, I guess. But one last question on this. A client told me once in 2021, he said, Mark, the year 2020, it was the year that flew by slowly. And I thought, what a great line that was. And the last 3 years have been interesting, would be an understatement. So, with all that's been happening, can you share with us what you're most grateful for and also what you're most hopeful for?
Well, at a personal level, I'd say I'm grateful that my family is healthy and generally thriving, and that all of the people that I love and care about and that I live surrounded by are mostly out the other side of this terrible pandemic. And I will hope and dream that it is over. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
But all of that is just so important to keep in our minds always. And at a professional level, I would say that it's a very exciting moment for nutrition as a community, and it's an exciting moment for philanthropy for nutrition. And I'm just really energized by the fact that this community is growing and diversifying. And what I'm excited about is what that actually means in terms of impact that is still to come. Because I think we've really just scratched the surface of what is possible when you combine all of these different really powerful actors, the world's biggest and most influential philanthropies, and trying to really extend that network out and drive its impact into the ground or for the people, in the communities that we serve. So I look forward to taking that momentum and making it real.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, I'm grateful for that you're a leader who cares and doing this stuff, and not to be cute, making us stronger. And in some ways, making it where we all have to find something else to do, basically.
That would be the ultimate blessing. Yeah.
But it's going to be a long time. But thank you for all you do and the impact you've made, and it's been great for us to get to know you more and work together with you. And everybody wants to, whether it's business or whatnot, make money, make a living or whatnot, but they also want to have purpose and make an impact now more than ever. So way to lead the way, and thanks for being on the series.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure.